and welcome to the latest Leadership Insights interview. I'm joined today by Mark Perry. He's the CEO of Vivid, based in Hampshire, and they're the largest provider of affordable homes. They're an award-winning organisation who provide homes and services for 72,000 customers. Mark, good morning and welcome. Can we start by finding out a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you come to be in your current position?
Yeah, sure. So I've worked in housing most of my career, actually, probably 30 odd years, I would think, or 30 years, something like that. I know I don't look old enough. But and I sort of started from a financial background, really. So I'm a sort of finance professional by background. I've lived locally in Hampshire all of my life, and as I say, sort of drifted into housing really early on in my career. I've done sort of most things in housing. So I've done a finance role. I've done sort of debt finance, which we're quite reliant on. I've also done worked for some large London housing associations in a sort of commercial director capacity. In 2013, I joined what was then Sentinel as the chief executive. It was the second CEO role I've had. And then in 2017, we did a merger with First Wessex Housing Association to form what is now Vivid. And I guess the reason I like sort of working in housing is I think it sort of combines up a couple of things, really. So it combines a sort of strong social purpose. I think if you're doing my job, you can put your head on the pillow at the end of the day and think you're doing something worthwhile. But also it requires a strong commercial focus. We are a business with a social purpose, but the business and the social purpose sort of take the same sort of preference in terms of our decision making. So yeah, I've had a great career. It's a great place to work.
And the sort of geography that you're covering then with Vivid is, can you tell me a little bit more about that, the area that you're working?
Yeah, so we've got about 32,000, just over 32,000 homes. And we operate predominantly in Hampshire, about 20 local authority areas. We do have recently expanded into West Sussex. We do have a little bit of housing stock in Berkshire and Surrey, but predominantly in Hampshire. And we are the largest provider of affordable housing in Hampshire, sort of by quite a margin, actually. I think we're almost half of all of the affordable housing stock across Hampshire. So yeah, sort of quite an interesting geography. We work with all different types of local authorities, so ranging from East Hants, which you might classify as a bit more rural, into Portsmouth City Council and Southampton City Council. So a good range of partners along the way. So quite a tight geography, really. And I think, sorry, I should say, I think we're quite unusual in that. A lot of larger associations are spread, very, very geographically diverse. And I think one of the things that we think being a bit more local means is that we understand the sort of needs of our communities a little bit better. And our partnerships with local authorities are probably a bit stronger because of that. We're able to have more sort of serious dialogue, if you like, with local authorities, where they know that we're serious about making a difference in our local communities.
And did that help you, that ability to have that dialogue through the pandemic? We'll talk about the pandemic now and then move on. But it affected people so much, didn't it? And from the point of view of your organisation, but also for the people that you're providing the housing for.
Yeah, I mean it's really interesting, isn't it? Because it feels like a bit of your life that you lost, I think, the pandemic, when you look back and you think it's 2021 now. But I don't think anybody was prepared. Nobody had on their risk maps global pandemics back in 2019. We had housing market crash, we had one or two other things, but we didn't have a global pandemic. And so I think, like most other businesses, really, we had to learn quite quickly on the cuff. I think our local authority relationships did help with that. So I think sometime early March, we decanted our offices and we sat around talking to our local authorities and other community leaders, really, so our members of parliament, and thinking a little bit pretty quickly about how we could make an impact in a way in which we probably didn't have in our plans at all. And actually, so we responded really, really quickly. I think recognised that we were in the middle of a human crisis, really, Nobody quite knew how long it was going to go on for. Nobody knew what it was going to do to the housing market. We had, people worried about their own health. We had customers being furloughed, losing employment, all of that sort of thing going on. So I think we recognised really early that it was a real human crisis and set ourselves, I think, some very high level objectives, really. So one of the things we did on the ground was I think within about 2 weeks, we made £250,000 available for community groups. So it went straight from, straight to the bottom line. We were already working with some community groups, and that £250,000 enabled us to put funding into support networks and food banks and those sorts of things, which again, we sort of forget, don't we, that April, May last year, that's where we were really. And we also made available, we did a deal with Vodafone where we got access to 400 tablets, which we made available to customers. Originally, we thought they would be available for older persons who would be isolated from because of the self-isolation. But we actually rolled them out to young children when they got sent home from school, who were arriving in our communities back at mum and dad sort of thing, without any technology to allow them to interface with the school. I think it also changed another couple of things, really. So we did that support really well. I think we knew the business was okay because, depending on the length of the crisis we were dealing with, but we're sort of pretty financially strong. So I don't think we ever really thought, crikey, we're going to go bust here, really, in the way in which some industries. But we did recognise that some of the people who live in our properties work in those industries that were going through the roughest of furlough. And so we sort of worked very hard at communicating with our customers a bit more. And I think someone said to me that if you'd been through the pandemic and you didn't learn something at the end of it, then it was a complete waste of time. And so I think what we learned was that actually the more you communicate, you just had to communicate all the time, really. And actually, because I think there was a degree of uncertainty, people were okay to hear, we don't know all the answers. We're doing this now, but we might do something in the future. So we really ramped up the communication with our customers. But there were some things we couldn't do. So we're carrying out repairs in people's homes, and the government put a stop to that roughly about April last year. So that meant that we had to communicate with people and say, actually, we can't come and fix X, Y, Z because we're actually not allowed in your property. But actually, we do have to come in to do a service to your gas boiler, for example. So that has meant that we've ended up with some legacy issues, really. We've got some, lag in terms of jobs that we haven't completed, which we're trying to work our way through. I think as a leader of an organization, chief executive, it was great because we didn't have the answer. People think you have a little book, don't they, of answers if you're the chief executive. You must have, otherwise you wouldn't be the chief executive. Actually, it meant that we became pretty agile and creative, and we've tried to sort of embed and continue that in the business as we move forward, really.
And was that within your team you were sort of working together with that? I guess it would be. And that in itself is a positive thing, isn't it? To see how your team reacts to a situation like that and you can all work together. But I guess with other leaders across, the city regions and Hampshire, you must have been sort of learning from each other, I guess.
Yeah, I think it was a pretty intense period, actually. That sort of March, April, May, June, I think was probably one of the most intense periods of my career. Spent an awful lot of time on the phone, both with other leaders and with my own team. But I think the way in which you deal with that is to sort of set some really high level sort of performance criteria. What does success look like? When we decanted our office, I was the last person to sort of leave, like the sort of captain leaving the sinking ship, I suppose, in a way. It was only by chance, not by design, actually. But as I was leaving, I sort of went to my whiteboard in my office and I thought, I just need to write up what are the really most important things to come through this successfully, really. And actually, they were really high level and really, quite straightforward, and you don't have to be bright to have come up with them, really. You just say, one around, the business still has to be here at the end of this, because at that time we didn't know how long this was going to go on for. We need to keep our customers and our residents safe. If our services suffer as a consequence of this, well, sort of we need to accept that. because we couldn't foresee what was going to happen. And then finally, the fourth one was I was determined that people were going to say good things about us as an organisation at the end of it. I was determined that people were going to say when the chips were down, Vivid reacted and behaved in the right way. And I just put those four things on my board, and we used those with the board and with my staff and my wider stakeholders in sort of translating the actions we were taking on the ground. So we sort of said, these are the four things we're interested in, really. And if the action we take helps us to achieve those four things, then that's okay. And that made it, in a way, that made it quite straightforward because it wasn't very complicated. But I think at one stage early on, my wife said to me, she said, I was like on the phone at 7 a.m. and getting off the phone about 10 o'clock at night, grabbing the odd cup of tea and a sandwich halfway between some of that. So it was pretty intense.
And housing generally, or the home, became such a focus, didn't it, through the whole pandemic? And whether that was with people suddenly realizing, oh, actually, I don't want to live here, or I can't live here, I can't work and live here. And has that sort of rolled out through the market that you're serving? Have you found that people are now thinking, because obviously there was a big sort of move literally a move afterwards, wasn't there, where people selling their houses and moving to the coast or moving to the countryside, or wanting to change their homes in some way? Have you had that same thing happening within the rental market? Have you found that?
Yeah, so I think you're right. I mean, people were at home, weren't they? And our customers and our employees, actually, you sort of think that asking people to work at home suits everybody. But if you are 21 years old and living at home with mum and dad and working out of your bedroom every day, that's not quite a good place to be. And you hear all sorts of stories, don't you, about people working on their ironing boards and so on and so forth. So I think there was a sort of concentration on, so what does home mean for us? And certainly we've seen that since we've sort of started to come out the end of this, there's more urgency for people to move homes, to do a management move of some sort. I think the real difficulty is I think people do get this. There's a massive shortage of housing in the UK, and there's a massive shortage of housing in Hampshire. I mean, people, you've heard through the party conferences recently about levelling up. People think that's a south-north thing. Actually, there's some levelling up that needs to happen in the south, and there was a recent study done in the last couple of weeks, which across those local authorities in Hampshire, there's a need for about 17,000 new homes over the next 5 years. And they're just affordable homes. That's without homes for people who are buying, outright in the market. And so it becomes very difficult when people are, what we might describe as sort of wanting to move, to actually give them the opportunity to do that, because there just simply aren't enough affordable homes for them to move into. And although we're doing our bit at Vivid to try and sort of ease that problem, the reality of it is we're building about 1,700 new homes a year. We're not building anywhere. We're never going to be able to solve that problem on our own. And so I think it's something that continues on, and we're still seeing that now. So the housing market has remained buoyant. People are still buying homes, and those people in our properties who have been, reflecting on the way they live, if you like, or what's now required of them, are now starting to want to move a little bit more. And not everybody, but an increasingly small proportion, I might describe it as.
And housing is you mentioned the levelling up, but it is such a political issue, isn't it? And especially how our society works in this country, where your value as a person almost is seen in your house, isn't it? And that getting on the housing ladder and having a mortgage and all that sort of thing. How do you sort of feel for young people? Because obviously, I mean, it's really difficult for them, isn't it? And do you think that there needs to be a rethinking of the rental market and how they operate within that?
Yeah, I mean, it is, it is incredibly difficult. I think there was a bit of research done by the Halifax recently, which suggested that so someone like Winchester, average house prices are 18 times earnings. So there's just no way that what one might describe as an average young couple can afford to buy a house outright in and around Winchester, and that holds true for a lot of the areas in which we operate. So I think it's really difficult, and I've got children myself who are in their 20s, and struggling to buy their first home. It certainly wasn't what it was like when I was in my early 20s, and you went up to your local building society at the top of the road, got a mortgage the same day, and then bought a house. So I think it is really difficult. There are some, we offer some really good products, and the government's got some really good products to help alleviate that. So you've got a shared ownership product where people can own a part and rent a part. The government did have Help to Buy. Yeah, so I think the government recognises that there's some pressure there. And fundamental reform to the rental market, is probably needed in some way. It's so if you're an affordable housing provider, as Vivid are, you've got quite a bit of regulation. Not everything we do is perfect, but there is quite a bit of regulation around our standards and our service offers and stuff like that. Actually, there's a massive amount of people renting in the private marketplace from people who own properties as part of their sort of retirement portfolio, you might describe. And standards there are often less good, really. And I've just come across an example of a young couple with 3 children. They're probably in their early 30s, just starting out in life. They're both hardworking individuals. Three young children, and they've just been given 2 months' notice to move out of their private rented house. So, there does need to be some reform, I think. And I think the government could do, over the last 10 or so years, there's been a reduction in the amount of subsidy available to organisations like ours to provide affordable housing. I think that needs to be reversed in some way, really. And then maybe reform of the private rental sector so that people get a sort of longer term guaranteed tenancy of some sort. Providing that they pay their rent, they do all the things that a responsible person should do. That they ought to be, I think, a longer guarantee of their ability to reside in the same properties. Because I think regardless of how many homes we build across the UK in the next 10 or 15 years, we're not going to meet the demand. And so the rental product has to be a viable alternative. And at Vivid, we're really sort of focused on, no demarcation between our rented products and our for sales homes, really. They look the same, they're the same quality, we're in the same neighborhoods, we have the same expectations of both those sets of individuals in terms of the way they live. But I suppose what you get when you move into a Vivid home is you get, as a rental property, you get a longer term security. You can sort of almost be there for life, if you like. You can, providing you maintain your sort of side of the agreement, really. So I think there does need to be, and we could do with the reform of the planning system as well. Sorry, I'm on my sort of pet subjects now, but too many people like me are homeowners sitting in our lovely homes saying I don't want to see any more property built down the road. I used to walk down there when I used to get my milk in the mornings, that sort of thing. Actually, there's too much of that. There's a lot of greenfield, non-specially designated land in Hampshire and further, and we need to, I think, almost switch the sort of thinking, really, from planning as a sort of luxury, if you like, to a presumption of planning, so that we can build homes. And that has to be done in the right way. You simply can't have huge, great big estates being added on with the infrastructure. So there needs to be an investment in infrastructure, schools, hospitals, GP surgery, roads, sewage, all of the IT infrastructure networks, so that people can get broadband and all those sorts of things. But we do need to move, I think, and I think we've successfully over the last 10 or 15 years not really paid enough attention to how we plan longer term. Probably illustrated by the fact we've had about 13 housing ministers in the last 10 years. So it probably gives you some idea about how committed we are as a society to actually solving the housing crisis. And of course, the government sort of believe, I'm not getting into a government bashing session, but successive governments have sort of believed that the answer is to buoy up the supply side. So with initiatives like Help to Buy, actually that's just buoying up, the demand side, I should say. And actually, we need some economic thinking around how we get supply. Supply is the answer to the question. Help to Buy just allow people to sort of get onto the ladder in a sort of slightly cheaper way, but actually didn't really do anything for those people that could never aspire to home ownership. And we do need some changes there.
And finally, Mark, if there was one thing that you could say to the government, what would that one thing be that you think could be done now? And as we come out of the whole pandemic, what needs to be done, do you think?
Well, am I only allowed one thing, Kate?
Only one thing.
What one thing would I do? Well, so I'm going to actually go for two things. So I think there's something on the house building side, and I think I touched on that earlier. I think Michael Gove's done a really good thing actually coming in and saying, I'm just going to look at the whole planning stuff really and take my time to understand it. I think that's absolutely right. But over the next year or so, we do need changes to the planning system really. Too often, local politics get in the way of people's futures, and that can't be right really. And so I think there does need to be some fundamental reform of the planning system. And then I think there's something about the government talks a lot about home ownership, and I think that's great. I'm a homeowner. I lived in a council house. When my parents were born, and I was born in a council house. That great 82 Thatcher thing of wanting to own your own home, we all swallowed that pill. And I think that's great. I think it is a really good aspiration for people to try and own a home. But there are some, the way things are going, there are some people who are never going to be able to do that really, I don't think. And therefore, I think the government needs to think a little bit harder about what it does for that group of people. And they are becoming, that group of people are normal people like you and I. They're teachers, nurses, trainee doctors, truck drivers. There aren't any of those anymore, but truck drivers, all those sorts of individuals. They're not people who have never worked and don't want to work. They're shop workers, and they're trying to make their way in the world. And at the moment, I think the government sort of forgets about them a little bit, and it ought to do a bit more about helping to address their needs, I think. Recently we've seen the universal credit cut, that's a 20%. I was reading some stats this morning, if you're a young person under 25, that's a 21% reduction in your income. Well, if you're me, you might be able to cope with that, but people generally on lower incomes can't cope with that. So I think the government really needs to think very, very hard about this levelling up label, because it's not just the north and south, it's about the haves and have-nots. And we need to make it easier, I think, for some of those people on lower incomes to have a safe and secure place to call home that gives them the longevity that we've talked about a bit, a place to set their roots down, get their job, have their children, bring their children up in a safe and secure environment so that the children can springboard off into whatever life holds for them next. And I think if they were the two things the government could do, pay a bit more attention to that, sort out their planning system, and I'll leave the other 15 things I think the government could do for another time, maybe.
We'll come back for those. Oh, Mark, thank you so much. It's really interesting, really insightful, and I'm sure there's a lot there that will resonate with people. Thank you so much for your time.
It's my pleasure. See you soon.